I would like to introduce Esther Hornberg, Dunedin, Florida. She was born in Chicago and a fan of baseball and her beloved White Sox for most of her 93 years. Esther attended the very first All-Star game held in 1933 at Chicago's Comiskey Park. She shares with us memories of that game as well as interesting tidbits from her baseball past.
The editor of the Chicago Tribune, it was his, Arch Ward was his name, I remember now. And he was the one who instigated that. And he thought it was a good attraction for baseball because being in Chicago at the World's Fair, at the time of the World's Fair. It was played at Comiskey Park. Managed by Connie Mack and the American League and John McCraw in the National League. It was a great game. If I could remember, I could tell you who was on first. I know Lou Gehrig was. I'm trying to think, Lou Gehrig. I think Charlie Gehringer at second. Joe Cronin at short. But I can't find out who was on third. In the outfield, Babe Ruth was in right. I don't know who played center. And I think Al. I don't know about who played left. That's the American League. Being an American League fan, I would know that. But the National League, I think Jim Bottomley played for the, was at first base. It was a great game. Babe Ruth hit a home run. Trying my best to think what the final score was, and I can't remember. It was a close game. 1933. Oh, let's see, I was born in 1916, so how old will I have been? 17 years old.
17, 16, 17.
It's a long time ago.
What were the circumstances that you went to the All-Star game?
Because I was a baseball nut, and I had to be at the very first All-Star game. And that was I even bought my own ticket. Again, we would sit out in right field and rib Babe Ruth when he was playing. But he would, if he wasn't batting that inning, he wouldn't go into the clubhouse. He'd come out the stand and sit with people. And of course, at that time, the White Sox were lucky to draw 3,000 people. So he'd come out and he'd sit with us, and he'd go say, "Go get me some beer, get me a hot dog." So then the next inning, he'd come over and get his hot dog and his beer. He never paid us for it.
Just set you apart. But you have a memory of Babe Ruth when you were real young.
Yeah, one day he took me. Loved to go out to the ballpark, and we'd always get there early so we could watch. At that time, it was you could go out and watch the batting practice and fielding practice, and that was great. So one day after they were doing their fielding, the Yankees were going off the field, he came over and he picked me up and he took me up to the clubhouse with him. But I didn't last up there very long. I walked in and somebody else grabbed me and took me out. Yeah, Joe DiMaggio was another great player. And Joe had his 57th hitting streak, and he sprained his ankle and he couldn't play. Chicago, and he couldn't play. And it was an Italian-American day in Chicago. It was a Sunday. And so he was the attraction at this American. As long as he couldn't play, he went to this American, Italian-American affair. So they gave him a lot of gifts. And that night, we were at the hotel where the Yankees stayed. I was with some friends, and they knew Joe DiMaggio. So they asked him in, and they came in into the cocktail room, and he came in and he had a drink with us. And then he said he asked me what size stockings I wore. And I said I wore a size 9. And he said, I got some stockings. They gave me some nylon stockings. And he said, I'll give them to you if you come up to my room.
Oh.
So I said, sure. So we all went up to his room.
Everybody.
Everybody went up to the room. It was great. He was a great guy. At that time, he was married to Miss Dorothy Arnold, his first wife. And she was expecting their baby. And she had form of toxemia. And she was just so swollen. And he said she'd never get into those stockings. And anyway, he said, sure, her feet are so big, it must be must wear a size 10. So anyway, I had those stockings, and I enjoyed wearing them too, because it was just before the war. Oh, wait a minute, it's after. Well, anyway, nylon was not, you couldn't buy nylon. One of the funniest things was Luke Appling was at bat, and Luke Appling had a history of fouling off balls. And he was at bat, and Dizzy Trout was pitching for the Detroit Tigers. And he was pitching, and Luke was batting, and I think Luke must have fouled off about 8 pitches. And finally, Dizzy threw his glove at Luke, and Luke even fouled that off. And Luke Appling just laughed. He stood there and laughed. And the umpire, if I remember correctly, was Bill Summers, an little fat little guy. He was so mad at the two of them, he both threw Dizzy Trout and Luke out of the ball game. But I think that was the funniest thing. The All-Star game we played in St. Louis. And I'll be watching, good Lord willing, I'll be watching that game. And I'll be rooting for the American League. And I'll compare it with the very first game that I'd seen in 1933.
Knew the players, knew all their names. You could see her there every day, shout hooray when they play.